Where am I at fault? How did
Yes.
I go wrong? Wow, I am such a disappointment. Wow, I blew it again. No, let me just reiterate what you just said. Diet culture is a cultural burden. It's not just ours alone.
No, no, I could not have said that better myself, Nina. Thank you for that because it really is a belief that it just gets passed down and regenerated. I mean, as we all know, it just keeps regenerating in different ways. It's like whack-a-mole. Once we finally kind of get a handle on one thing, it pops up in a different way.
Welcome, welcome. We are delighted to have Kim with us today. Dr. Kim Daniels is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience working with individuals struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating. She's a certified intuitive eating counselor and integrates IFS, internal family systems therapy, into her practice to help clients make peace with food and respect their bodies. She also has her very own podcast called the Emotional Eating and Everything Else podcast. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And I love the way you said the title of the podcast. You really emphasize the and everything because
Everything
that's a
else.
huge, huge everything, right?
Yes,
It
it
is.
could keep you on the air for the next 13 years. Yes. Kim, thank Kim, thanks so much for being with us. We like to start off by asking our guests, what brought you to this work? It's not easy work and it's soulful. What brought you to this?
Yeah, so that's always a great question. And when people ask me that question, I always say, there are parts of me that feel kind of bad because I feel like so many people come to this work with their own histories of their own, perhaps eating disorder or, really trauma history related to food in their body, something like that. That's not really my experience. Um, I absolutely have always been an emotional eater. Food has always been my thing. So I do get sort of the emotional eating piece. Has it ever been a full-blown eating disorder? No. But food, again, has always been kind of my go-to. I'm sure we'll get into internal family systems, so I'm gonna speak in terms of parts, but I have parts that absolutely use food to reward me, to soothe me, things like that. So that's always kind of been my thing. But for me, I remember when I went to even before grad school, like I kind of always knew I wanted to be a therapist. And when I was applying to grad school, I had finished my undergrad. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology, which gets you exactly nothing. And so knew I had to go on to grad school. And when I was applying, I had worked briefly just doing office work at like a private practice in town. And I remember talking to one of the therapists there when I was, kind of getting all my grad school stuff ready to go and writing my essays and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, "Well, like, why do you want to be a therapist? What do you like? Who do you want to work with?" And I said, I just really want to work with women. Like, I want to empower women." And I remember him saying, like, "That's wonderful. That's great. But like, be an empowered woman. Like other, the best way to empower women is to be an empowered. Don't just talk about it, like, do it." And so like that has always kind of stuck with me. And so really just focusing my practice, I mainly work with women and just really, to me, and we kind of touched on this before we started recording, like I could go into all the politics of all of this and all of the like all of that sort, all of those things and how that impacts our relationship with food and our bodies. And that's always just been so fascinating to me and just so incredibly important to talk to
Well,
women
let's
about. Yeah. Let's
Let's
okay.
let's let's do that for a second because it
Sure.
is so important. Mostly we are talking to women and to really look at this whole confluence of food and being a woman and in our culture, let's look at it because we tend to individualize it. Oh, this is
Right.
my problem.
Right,
So
right,
can you
right.
speak
Yeah.
to what you're seeing and what's bubbled for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, again, sort of even in terms of internal family systems, all right, we talk about this concept of burdens, right? We have our own burdens that we're carrying, but we have these sort of what we call cultural burdens, right? Just like these beliefs, these inaccurate beliefs that gets passed down from person to person to person and generation to generation to generation. And to me, diet culture is an American cultural burden. And not just in America, obviously, but certainly in the US. Diet culture is a cultural burden that we are all living under.
We've made sure to spread it around the world, so it's now
That
not
yes,
just
luckily
American.
we have
Yeah,
shared. Yeah, I obviously that's sarcasm, but yeah, we've done a great job of sharing that. And there's like, oh, I'm sure the research that they did like in Fiji years
yeah,
back that I'm
I
sure you
was
know
thinking
about.
about.
That's yeah, I mean, it's as soon as they introduced American television into Fiji, eating disorders went through the roof.
And Kim, I want to highlight what you just said. Diet culture is a cultural burden. And I feel like we could all have it like tattooed on our foreheads and written on our mirrors because we as women need to hear that over and over so that we don't go, oh gosh, what's my problem? Where am
Yes.
I at fault? How did
Yes.
I go wrong? Wow, I am such a disappointment. Wow, I blew it again. No, let me just reiterate what you just said. Diet culture is a cultural burden. It's not just ours alone.
No. No, I could not have said that better myself, Nina. Thank you for that because it really is a belief that it just gets passed down and regenerated. I mean, as we all know, it just keeps regenerating in different ways. It's like whack-a-mole. Once we finally kind of get a handle on one thing, it pops up in a different way. But it really is this very sort of I mean, certainly folks who have kind of looked into this, diet culture started, in a racist culture and is built on that foundation. So it is, you know, creating this hierarchy of bodies, from, that's how it started, right? And so adding to that, this, patriarchal, it's always been, I always love to share the fact that the first Miss America pageant was in 1921, the year after women got the right to vote. That's not a coincidence, right?
Right, right,
No,
right.
So
right.
women get any little bit of power
And
and
then they need to
boom.
get smaller, right. It goes right, it goes with the vote. It goes with the '60s
Exactly.
liberation, and then we had Twiggy, right? Every time we get big presence, bring power, whoop, you better have a small body.
That are exactly, you're absolutely right, and I remember my very first semester of grad school going to a presentation on eating disorders, and the psychologist said, "You know, men go to the gym to get bigger, women go to the gym to get smaller." And it was
Ouch.
like that very simple thing. I mean, that was in 1995 that I went to that, and it stuck with me for this long because, yeah, that says it all, doesn't it?
Well, and it's interesting you say that because I think one of the things that all three of us probably talk about with our own clients is about it isn't even about body size, it's about just feeling strong in your body.
Yeah.
Strong is not a word that women are often comfortable using,
No,
like we're
no.
borrowing it. You
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
strong in a million ways, but certainly
yeah.
to just feel strong in your body, whatever it looks like.
Yeah, and Jenny, I appreciate you bringing that up because when I was younger, I mean, I was in a very, sort of straight sized body as a kid, but I was not like I look at my daughter and she's this tiny little thing. I was always my body type is just more muscular. And so, back when I was it's like I almost hate to say this out loud, but back when I was a cheerleader, I have parts that are like, I can't believe I was ever a cheerleader. But back in like elementary, middle school,
They were your happy parts. You
they were
want
my
to
yes.
your happy
Yes.
parts wanted to be heard.
Yes, and there wasn't much women's sports in my community back then. That's kind of all we had. But I was always kind of on the bottom of the pyramid because I was one of the stronger ones, even though I was short. And I had parts that were really proud of that, but felt weird for being proud of that, right? Because that wasn't everybody wanted to be the cute little one on top, you know? But I was kind of like, well, but I think it's kind of cool being one of the people that's holding all this up. But that was not, that wasn't okay.
What a great way to look at that. Not to get off topic here, but I can't tell you how many folks, we've all treated and worked with who were at the top of that pyramid. And the minute they couldn't be at the top of the pyramid anymore, they made it mean something. And so did their world make it mean something, and it created a narrative that followed them for decades about that they were now no longer small enough, good enough, excellent enough.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
really just carries with them forever. So it's just
Yeah.
fascinating what happens in those settings. Yeah.
And it's also interesting what's happening now. Like there's some positive change. There's a lot of not so positive changes around food and body and the expectations. But last season's Dancing with the Stars,
Mm,
Ilana Mayer, who is an
Yes.
Olympian rugby player, who is a woman of stature. She
Yes.
is a freaking tank. She is so strong.
Yeah,
mhm.
it's
And there
amazing.
she is being decked out in all the like crazy Dancing with the Stars,
Yeah.
slinky things.
Yeah.
And really, in real time, redefining femininity for our culture, for those people who are tuning in and not just tuning into the show because being that she's in the era that she's in, she's gone TikTok viral,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the whole world is seeing this woman who is massively strong, like just incredible, you know, athlete.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Be
I hope it creates a very, very different narrative for lots
I
I
of
hope
hope
younger,
so.
so.
I
not really
hope
been
so.
yeah.
So let's talk about narratives for a second. Let's talk about narratives in terms of how we change narratives and what influences what, how our own narrative influences our eating disorders or disordered eating.
That question, brings us right into this idea of internal family systems or IFS as
Yes.
we're calling it, right? Because and maybe Kim, you can address this, since this is really your area of expertise, right? That the narrative that actually starts to create and generate some of those parts.
So, just brief little intro on what IFS is. So, IFS, like, I love to sort of explain IFS as like, have you seen the movie Inside Out? Right. Like most of us have seen that movie. And so that is a great little snapshot of, I call it like a watered down version of IFS, where
And by the way, if anybody listening has not seen that movie, please go see that movie
it's
anyway.
so great. It's so
It
great.
really,
Yeah.
really gives you the sense of this,
It's not just for kids. Just have your tissues with you. But, the main character has like these 5 little parts that make up, her personality, and each part has a role that they play in her system, right? So IFS believes that we have this kind of a whole internal cast of characters, all that have different roles in our system. And so I think one of the things that to me, IFS is incredibly helpful with is that a lot of people say, well, I know it up here, like pointing to my brain, but I don't feel it in here, like pointing to my heart. Right. So I know that diet culture is bad up here, but in here, I'm still kind of living with that. Like I'm still buying into it and I can't let it go. And to me, this is where IFS is incredibly helpful because our parts have taken in this message at a very, very deep level, like really from day one, and even prior. For some people, like if you are, we kind of know, and not that I can speak to any of this hardly at all, but like the whole epigenetics, research, kind of showing that even trauma is passed down through genes and things like that. I think about, I mean, we are a body, in utero, right? We are developing a body in utero. And if your body isn't being tended to even in utero, you might have parts that develop with a belief of I'm not worth caring for.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And that's not to put a pressure
No.
on mothers who are carrying, their fetuses. It's
Right.
really also about that there's this environment that, a baby is born into and is grown into, and some of it is passed down, we'll say
Absolutely.
genetically,
Yep.
but also because we embody the thoughts and behaviors of everything around us, and most specifically, our caregivers or the lack thereof,
That's right.
those we attach to, those we never got to attach to. So that's even just coming out of the gate.
Coming out of the gate. Yes, exactly, exactly, and there's no parent who can be 100% responsive to a kid. It's not possible, right? There's no malice with that. There's no, even the best of caregivers is not going to be, oh, as soon as the baby's crying, as soon as they're hungry, as soon as it's just not possible. So it makes total sense that we have parts that can pop up very young who are experiencing food scarcity, neglect, whatever, or at least, kind of having that experience. But certainly, and our caretakers are also carrying the burden of diet culture. Through no fault of their own. They didn't ask for it, we didn't ask for it, none of those things. But, so all of this starts really, really early, and our parts take in these messages, again, even from our culture. I think, they did research like decades ago. And I mean, there's been more research since, but like I think it starts at age, I want to say either 3 or 5 of kids, if they're shown pictures of kids with maybe a child with glasses and a child who is an amputee, a child who's blind, a child who's in a large body. And, who do you not want to be friends with? And more often than not, it's the child in the large body, right? We learn that incredibly, incredibly young, right? So all of that, there's very subtle messaging about that, and there is blatant messaging about that. And if you happen to have a caretaker who really, again, has been really impacted by that and might be really focused on their body and really focused on dieting, and again, we're not blaming anybody here, but if that was their experience and you're watching that, or you've been told, your body's too big, it needs to change, it needs like so, again, it's like best case scenario, you're just getting it from our culture, but that's still a terrible case scenario, right?
And so then it makes sense, right, that there are going to be parts of us
Yeah,
that have to come forth, right?
yeah,
Either I mean, and I'll let you explain the depth of this, right? But parts of us that need to come forth almost in response to how we perceive our world from the get-go. From the get-go. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is the way we fit in. This is the way we're acceptable, right? So with IFS, we really talk about we have parts that are protective parts who are protecting parts that are what we call exiles. And those exiles are the ones that are really carrying what I call like the kind of the really heavy stuff, like the, feelings of shame, feelings of, grief, beliefs of I'm not good enough. We all have parts that are carrying that based on our experiences. And we develop parts kind of develop to protect those parts. And we do that in a number of like a gazillion different ways. But one way is certainly to try to change our body. If I can change my body and make it acceptable to what this culture says, and we all know what this culture says is acceptable and what's not. We don't even have to go into that, right? We all know, then I'll be good enough, then I'll be worthy. Except it doesn't work though, right? Like it really doesn't work. We've all had that experience of, well, I got down to this size that I thought was going to be the size and it wasn't the size, right? So,
There is no side, right?
yeah, yeah. So those parts, like we really, one of the things about IFS is to really look at everything as a part that is really trying to be helpful to you and has a very positive intent for you. But all of that is based on this culture that we're living in, right?
I wanna talk about this word you used, which is exiles, right?
Yes.
'Cause if you're not familiar with internal family systems or IFS, it sounds harsh. Who's being thrown off the island, right?
Right.
So so
Right.
so can you explain a bit what you mean, by the terminology, the part that is an exile?
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that. So we have parts like I don't know how Dick Schwartz is the psychologist who founded IFS. I'm not sure why he uses that term, except that what happens is we have parts, and exiles tend to be young parts because we're more easily traumatized when we're young. And if, so say you have a part that is carrying a lot of shame. If that's the part that's kind of running the show in through the course of your life, life is going to be hard, right? When we're leading with shame, when we're leading with I'm not good enough, when we're leading with, grief, life is really hard. So our system, in order to just keep going, kind of tries to exile is a harsh word, but tries to kind of push that part kind of down,
Mhm.
um, so that it doesn't get hurt again, right? So that it doesn't take over the system. Because we're not making our best decisions when we're coming from a place of shame and I'm not good enough, right? It's hard to be effective in life when we're coming from that place. So our system is kind of like, we got to lock these parts away and try to keep them as happy and kind of quiet as we can in order to just keep going. That's what we mean by exile. It is a harsh word. I hear what you're saying, but that's what we mean by that. Yeah.
One of the ways that I like to think about it is just what you say, lock it away. Like the parts that we'd be like, you know what? You go in the cabinet, you go in like a closet in our
Yeah,
room where we're
exactly.
putting stuff and we're like, I don't want to deal with this. Nope, in the closet, in the closet, in the closet. But then it takes some effort to keep that closet door shut. And so then what do we do to keep that door shut? Oh, food is a really great way to
Yes, it
keep that
is.
door shut and to not hear the pounding of the parts that are inside going, hello, I'm still here. And we're like, no, no. And then suddenly people open the closet and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like, it's spilling out, it's so much."
Yeah. And, Kim, you used a term that I think we can't jump over, which is that it's also to push it down, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
just the metaphor of that. When
Mhm.
Yes.
when you when
Mhm.
you think of the literal meaning of pushing it down, right? It sort of starts to describe either emotional eating or, the eating that leads up to even, purging, right? It's so visceral, and yet it becomes a way to survive, and that's the point, right? That there's compassion and there's humanity about the fact that we all do what we can to survive, and on a psychological level, which kinda drives the ship anyway, whether we like it or not, on a psychological level, there are these parts of us that are just kinda running the show, and the idea of getting into a therapeutic setting where you can start to parse the parts and start to really understand them, fascinates me because I know, and maybe you can speak to this, I know that in the clinical setting, it's not even just this intellectual understanding of them, because that's one part, but it's also interacting with them. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's kind of, what we were kind of talking about before in terms of there's this sort of intellectual understanding of maybe, yeah, I'm an emotional eater and I know I eat when I'm stressed, right? But that's only going to take you so far. And that's, again, those are parts that are like, oh, now I understand what it is. But that's again, it's only going to take you so far. So there's a lot of ways that we kind of work in IFS. There's kind of a lot of things going on at the same time. But so one of the things is getting to know, we all have these parts. So we're getting to know the part maybe that turns to food for emotional reasons. And the whole point of that is those are protector parts, parts that are using the food are the protective parts, and they're protecting these exiled parts. And Nina, what you were saying about knocking on the door is exactly right. The way that exiles were described to me is like it's kind of like when you're trying to keep beach balls underwater, right? You can do it, but they're always trying to pop up and it's always effort to keep them down, right? So those are our exiles. They want to be heard, they want to be seen, they want to be validated. But our system is like, that's too dangerous. That's too scary. We got to keep them quiet, keep them in that closet. So that was a great way of putting it. So we want to get to know those. We always start with the protectors, which are the parts that are using food. And we want to, so we kind of get to know them. What's your role? What's your job? How did you get this job? How old are you? We kind of ask a series of questions. And then we can kind of work our way to who are you protecting? And then, we can, I mean, this is all like best case scenario, best therapy session ever, right? And then we get to the exile part, right? But in addition to one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is in addition to parts, IFS believes that we all have this core self. And the self is so when Dick Schwartz was sort of developing the model, he was actually working with clients diagnosed with bulimia when he started developing the model and he, started noticing them talking about parts. Part of me wants to stop this, but part of me doesn't. And so, he really started playing around with that. And then he started noticing that clients, when he would say, hey, let's get curious about that part, they would say, I don't think that's a part. I feel like that's me. And so he developed this whole concept of like we all have this core self, and our core self is compassionate and curious and confident and calm. We have all these 8 C's that we use to describe that. So we all have this resource inside of us. And so part of the work is almost like introducing our parts to ourself.
You ever get clients who come in and say, "What if my core is damaged?"
That's a great question.
Because either right, either because of trauma or because I think I was born that way, I'm just weird, I'm different than others or some
Yeah.
such thing.
Yeah. Yeah, people believe that, or I don't have a self. And for some people, I mean, not to get too in the weeds with this, but our self can also be exiled. Our self can also be kind of shoved in a closet by our system, because the self is sort of it's compassion. And if you grow up in a system where compassion is absolutely dangerous, your system can also exile yourself. Again, like, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with all of that, but
It's something that I also wanna add in. This is one of the reasons, there are many reasons, but this is one of the reasons why you wanna work with somebody who is qualified in this work, right? Somebody like you, Kim, or Jenny, or me, that can hold you and can actually model self when you can't.
right, you're absolutely right. We start off as the self in the room, as we say with our clients, right? So, when people come in, I don't have a self. I've never experienced, and some people haven't really experienced self. And so we have ways of helping them to do that. But some of it is sort of saying, Jenny, to your question, some of it is sort of saying, listen, I know, like like spouting theory at people isn't super helpful, but like the theory is that self cannot be damaged. And I wholeheartedly buy into that. And again, looking at the amount of work that Dick Schwartz has done in this model, and he has worked with every kind of person under the sun. He has worked in prison systems. He has worked with perpetrators. He has worked with every single person that man has met has a self. And so, being able to sort of say, "Listen, I get that you don't buy that right now, but if you can just hang in there with me, I promise you're going to see that you have a self in there, and it is not damaged."
But that's the curiosity, right? Because if one really feels like, I don't have a self, I don't have a core anymore. I might have had it at one time. I don't know what it is, and I don't even think it's there anymore, right? That's camouflage. That's the point,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
if you really say to yourself, I can't tell you how many times we all hear, "I've done it all. I've done everything. I've been in therapy for decades. I've been on every diet on the planet. This is my last stop." Okay, good stop. It's my last one, right? And you made a good choice. And I'm not even sure really this is just ever gonna change.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you say
Totally.
so, right? And
Yeah.
that's not the core speaking. That's the
No,
point. That's not the self that's speaking.
that's right.
Those are parts that have developed over time, kind of without our consent. That's the point. The parts develop just because they develop,
Right.
and
'Cause somebody
that
needs to do it. Somebody needs to do it, right. And yeah, and to your point, like, I get that too. Like, I've been in and out of therapy, nothing has worked, da, da, da. And, and that so it is absolutely understandable that somebody might be coming in with parts going, like, "This is gonna do me any good. What's different about this?" And that is absolutely understandable. Yeah.
I think it has to be said that, as you get into the depth of this work, and if you really start to identify a level of compassion for yourself and a different way of sort of, moving about your parts, right? There is still, I don't know if you agree with this, there's still a behavioral piece that has to do with what I'm going to call habit. In other words, you've done things a certain way in response to the roles of these parts, we'll say, right? So you've done things a certain way, maybe for decades. And
'Cause
now
it
you,
worked
and now
It
on
you
some
did.
level.
of
Yes.
course, right? And
Yep.
now you come up with these extraordinary insights and different ways of viewing yourself and seeing yourself and feeling about yourself. And there are these behaviors that you've been doing, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
There again, there's a gentleness that's necessary to now look at them curiously and differently and say, "Do these even work anymore?
Right.
And
Right.
can I do something else? Can I be something else?" Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
Right.
also to have that conversation in collaboration with self. So, okay, if
Yes.
you don't, right? If with self, with the different parts that go, no, but this really worked for me. It really worked for me every time I was lonely at night to
Mhm.
eat a box of cookies. That worked. And now self is going, well, I don't know, does it? And there's that part that was lonely. Well, I don't know. It
Mhm.
did.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's brainstorm. What else if you're
Mhm.
feeling lonely?
Mhm.
How
Mhm.
else can we support you, lonely part?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So to
Right.
work with those different parts to create different habits, rituals, ways of tending to ourselves.
And if you like, okay, so let's say you have a part that you have an exile part that's carrying immense shame. And one way of dealing and they have a protector part that uses food to just kind of numb that out, right? If we can work with that exile part to let go of shame, that protector part doesn't have to jump in anymore because there's nobody getting triggered, right? So at the end of the day, that's what we're going for is getting to the exiles to let go of what they're carrying. And then those protector parts they don't have to do that job anymore because there's nothing to protect. Right. So it does. So you're absolutely right, Nina. Sometimes it is a whole, hey, let's check in. Does that if I'm lonely, it doesn't make sense to be eating a box of cookies, or I wonder if there's something we can do to actually address the loneliness. Maybe I need to reach out to a friend right now. Maybe that's a more sort of self-led activity to engage in instead of letting this part jump in and kind of numb me out, right? You're absolutely right about that.
Or sometimes I'm in a crowd and I'm still lonely.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm with a bunch of friends and I might still feel lonely. And so that's a bit harder work, right? To really understand what that feeling is, how old it is, how used to it you are almost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly, exactly. So yeah, so again, it's like IFS is kind of working in a few different ways all at the same time. You know, it's working with those protector parts to go, hey, let's really kind of look at this, but it's also then getting under that to work with the exile. If I let that go, then yeah,
Is it accurate to say that there's also what goes with the parts are our stories about the parts and our stories about events in our lives and things that have happened because I'm imagining, as you really get into this work, if you are someone who has suffered, some level of trauma, right? It's not to change your version of it. You are the
no,
one that happened to, you understand it the way you do, you experienced it the way you do, your body experienced it the way you experienced it, right? But it's about somehow holding it differently. I mean, is that sort of, what we're aiming for here?
yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. It really is about when we get to meeting those exiles who are the ones who really are carrying the burdens of whatever trauma. And that could be the memories, that could be beliefs that they've taken on about themselves because of the trauma or just the emotions they're still carrying. I mean, I really feel like the most important thing is for self to be witnessing that. I mean, our exiles want to be heard and to just tell their story. And like a huge, huge piece of healing in that whole process is just to, again, to have that connection with self and to have the client's self just be going, yeah, that was terrible. That was terrible.
And Kim, what you're saying is so important because in people think, well, I'm going to come to therapy and I'm going to tell my stories again to the therapist. And that's not the point,
You're
right?
absolutely
The
right.
point is for us to hear it ourselves, for ourself to hear it, right? So that there's a integration and an understanding and that the compassion can flow within ourselves, right? Sure, as as a therapist we can hold that space, but ultimately we want our clients to be able to embody that compassion and for their selves to do the heavy lifting.
That's such an important point. I mean, it reminds me of some of the older models like psychodrama and Gestalt therapy, right? Where you might
It's built on that. IFS is
Yeah.
absolutely built on those.
must be because in those models, right, your self witnesses the conversation, but the conversation isn't with yourself. The conversation is with perhaps another in your life, alive or
Right.
dead, right? So, but that's the difference. I think it's just a brilliant model.
It is, and I think, that's kind of going back to, Jenny, what you were saying earlier about clients who come in, it's like, "I've done this a million times," and one of the messages that I like to give is, like, we're not here to rehash all of this again, right? Because inevitably, there's a part that says, "I don't wanna talk about all that stuff anymore. I've already talked about that so many times," right? And I always say, like, your parts don't have to tell me anything. To Nina, to your point, that's not really the goal here. Your parts need yourself to know what happened and to hear what happened and to just sit with that and hold that space. You don't ever have to tell me any of the details if your parts don't want you to. That's fine. I don't need to know. I'm here to just sort of guide that process. That's it. And so and that can be really relieving for folks who are like, I have told 27 different therapists the same story and I don't want to say it again. You don't have to.
But I wanna say something about that. Like, Jenny, you said, this is my last stop. This is the last thing I'm doing." But often for women, food and body, food first and then the relationship with body are the last stops. I'm sure you both have this in your practice, incredibly competent, capable, amazing women who have done so much work on themselves, done all the things, are very functional in their life, and they're like, "Why am I still having unwanted eating behavior and still hating my body?" And it does. The way we treat ourselves ends up being the last stop.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
The sentence I often hear is, "I'm so good at so many things, and there's just this one thing,
One
just this
thing.
one thing,"
Just
right?
one
Yeah.
little thing.
Yeah.
Never mind that it wraps up every single
Every other
thing of
thing.
their entire life, but that's
That's
okay.
right.
One thing, we're good. One thing, no problem. Yeah,
You're
yeah.
so right.
Yeah.
You're so right.
Okay. So, Kim, I wanna ask you a question that is a sort of fun question around based on the title of our podcast called Her Story on a Plate, which is if you were to share a dish, a food dish that represents your food story or therapeutic philosophy, what would it be? I know, you take your time. What would it be and why? This is very open-ended.
Oh, man.
Don't panic, we're not asking you to cook, it's okay. That would panic me, so, okay.
It's so I'm actually really intrigued by the whole, like, parts palooza going on in my head right now in terms of, like, the parts is like, what am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to make this sound, like, really smart? I had a part that immediately went, "It's gotta have chocolate in it somewhere," and I had a part that went, "It's also gotta have kale." So that sounds disgusting, doesn't it? Um, but I guess, man, do I have to come up with, like, an actual dish, or can it
You
be a
can make it
little it
up.
could be okay.
Yeah.
So I would say, and I'm gonna borrow this a little bit from, like, a dietitian colleague that I share a lot of clients with her, but I also just kind of met with her briefly just to kind of work on my own, like, how can I eat to better support, like, these, couple health conditions that I have. And and I realized that I had parts that were still really holding on to what a meal should look like. And she was like, "Why don't you just make a little charcuterie board of something?" And it was like, "Wait, what? That can be a dinner?" You know? So that was like this which goes like, to me, that speaks so much about, again, just even the basics of how we look at food and what meals are supposed to look like and what is a breakfast food and a dinner food and all that kind of stuff that we have made meaning out of that we don't need to make meaning out of. But that's a whole other story. So I think where I'm heading with this is that it would be kind of a plate of a lot of different things. It would be very nourishing foods and it would be like some mac and cheese, some comforting foods. It would be there's a bakery in town that I absolutely love and they tend to do like a different cheesecake every week.
Now you have to name them for people who are
Oh,
in your area.
absolutely. Shout out to Taste by Spellbound in
Okay,
Connecticut. 3 locations.
okay.
Yeah, they're fantastic, and they do, like, this it's like a snickerdoodle cheesecake that is absolutely to die
Oh
for,
my
so
goodness.
that would be on there. So, to me, like, one of the things that I always say to people is, like, like food still gets to be emotionally comforting to you. The goal here
Mhm,
is not to never do this again because that doesn't even make
mhm.
sense to me, right? Food is absolutely comforting. So we get to still have that. We just want to make sure that actually the parts that are using it to help other parts, like we were talking about the loneliness, it's kind of missing the boat in some ways, right? Food is not going to help loneliness necessarily. So we want to make sure that, sometimes at the end of a bad day, the food, man, that is the thing that's going to hit the spot. And there's nothing wrong with that. That still gets to be on that plate.
I love what you said. Just to use the metaphor, the idea of a charcuterie board, right?
Yeah.
It's about variety.
There you
It's
go.
it really is, and, I am confident there are some people that will be listening to this podcast and say, "Can you believe these 3 chicks are just naming all of the food? Don't they realize it's gonna trigger us and all that?"
I
Don't let it
understand.
don't yeah, don't let it. Don't let it.
Yeah.
It's just about naming the foods that have some meaning and
Yeah.
putting it out there. I mean, I appreciate the transparency of it, right? I mean, that's the idea. They don't represent who you are. They represent just a part of you. I mean,
Right.
that's the
Right.
point.
And
Yeah.
it's okay for parts to still love food. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Kim, it's the IFS charcuterie board. Because
Love
you
it.
literally did that. Like, my part wants this, and another
That's
part
okay.
wants this, and another
Yes.
part wants that, and another part wants this, right? And shouldn't that be a day of eating, right? There's a part of me in the morning that absolutely needs a nutrient-dense meal because I do a lot of my work in the morning.
Mhm.
And then there's a part of me somewhere in the day where it's like, "Do I get to party now? Like,
Right.
where's my treat?" Right? So, like, I love that idea of a parts charcuterie board.
I love that.
And
Yeah. That's
how do we bring that into our life in terms of our relationship with food that gives us permission to feed our different parts on many levels?
that's
Food,
right.
emotionally, time, energy, all of it.
All of it. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I was just gonna say, it's important to say that there's a part that also moralizes about food, right? So the part that's
Yes.
moralizing about food is listening to this and saying, "Well, how come they didn't mention carrots?" Well, because carrots are on the board too.
Carrots could be on the board. Your board is going to look different than my board, right?
They didn't mention healthy food, right? And you wanna just stay curious about that because
Yeah.
you wanna
Yeah.
know, is that fear speaking? Is that fear speaking? And that's the curiosity I think we need.
Right, and going back to your point of that's a part that's moralizing food because it learned to moralize food.
You bet.
Going back
You
to the very beginning, like, one of the things I like to say is, like, none of this is authentic to us. None of this concern about our bodies and concern about food and concern about none of that's authentic to us. We learned all of that. Our parts learned all of that, and they can unlearn all of that because, they're just trying to survive, right? But
Yes.
we can help them unlearn that.
I wanna end right there. We can unlearn it. It is possible. It is doable. We can unlearn, we can heal, we can be in a positive and caring relationship with our body and our food. And Kim, thank you. Would you tell us how people can reach you?
Yeah, yeah. So my website is drkimdaniels.com. One of the great things about being a psychologist is that psychologists do have a national telehealth license now. So and there's like 40 or 42 states have signed on board to this. So the good news is I psychologists are not bound by state lines anymore. So I'm in Connecticut, but I can see people in most states all over the country, except for Massachusetts and New York, which are my neighbors. So that's really helpful. But most other places, I can work with people outside of Connecticut. So that's a good thing. So all that information is on drkimdaniels.com. And as Nina said, the podcast is the Emotional Eating and Everything Else podcast, which talks a lot about IFS. So if any of this has piqued anybody's interest in terms of IFS, that's a place to learn more.
Well, Kim, I feel privileged that I got to meet you, while you were actually doing the training, and you're great at them, and we appreciate the contribution that you make to our field and to clients alike. And it's been a delight to have you. And thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's been an absolute delight. I feel like we could talk for another 5 hours about all of this, and we
I
could.
hope you come back. I hope you
Yeah,
come
I'd
back
love
Yes,
for another
to,
that would
yeah.
be
conversation.
great.
And thank you
Thank
both
you.
for the work that you're doing as well. It's so incredibly important. Nina, you were on, I don't remember which episode. I should have looked for the number, but you were on my podcast.
I
So,
was.
yeah, go back and listen to that. Absolutely. It was a great conversation. So, thank you so
It
much.
was. Good. Thank you, Kim.